wonderful. Well, thank you. We'll keep these down. All right, well, we'll go ahead and get started. And I am going to do a brief introduction, even though you really need very little introduction. You will be the only person that I imagine I will ever have a chance to talk to who has an action figure that has been designed after her. So
yes, yeah, I was digitized.
You were digitized. That's outstanding. Yeah. And again, I think I heard once that the more important the person, the shorter the introduction needs to be. But just because I think it's wonderful to remind folks, you are or have been an American librarian, best-selling author, literary critic, and former executive director of the Washington Center for the Book at the Seattle Public Library. And your prolific reading and knowledge of books made you locally famous in Seattle, but really obviously nationally and beyond, where you've regularly appeared on public radio recommending books, achieving broader fame with Book Lust, your 2003 Guide to Good Reading. You've also been named 2011 Librarian of the Year by Library Journal. And you're the author also of a novel, more recently released, I believe, yes, right? A couple years ago, and a memoir, which I will tell you, I was late in trying to find, but I would love to read.
No memoir. That's a mistake.
Oh, it's a mistake.
That's a mistake. That's on Wikipedia?
Wikipedia.
Yeah, I don't know. I have to learn how to take that off.
Well, I think anyone can go in there and correct. Maybe I'll go in there.
Oh, good. Just delete that whole sentence. I don't want to. I always think that, I mean, I would never write a memoir, but because I think that the Book Lust books that I've done are really, they're a picture of my reading and what I know. I have a book coming out in September, a new book called The Writer's Library. And a friend of mine here in Seattle and I interviewed about 24 writers around the country about the books they've loved as kids and all through their lives. So,
wonderful.
That was great. And what what I've always known, but what I saw, especially in the interviews that we did, and we did them in their houses for the most part. We went to them to interview them. And what I saw, when you talk about the books you've loved over your life, you're talking about your life. You can't get away from that. And and so I think that's fine. Good. Book Lust will be my memoir.
Book Lust is your memoir. That's a beautiful way of looking at it, actually. And actually, we're looking forward to the Writer's Library. So maybe we'll have to do this again in September.
Oh, that would be great. Good.
Talk about it. Wonderful. Well, I'm just going to mention here for those who are on the Zoom, and if you're on Facebook Live, it would be great if you can get on the Zoom. If you'd like to ask questions in the chat, I have a few questions that were sent in advance, and I have some of my own questions, but please feel free to type a message into the chat, and then we can ask Nancy while she's with us this evening. Good. So what would you say now? We're broadcasting here as part of Friends of the Winthrop Library, trying to find a way to advance the mission of the library in this very strange time, and also working pretty hard on closing a capital campaign to build a new library in the Valley. And I wonder what you might say to community members on the cusp of building a new library.
Well, for me, the public library is the heart of the community. It's the heart and the soul of the community. And it's a place that when I was a kid, I grew up in a not very happy family, and the library was was the place where I went every day after school. I spent all day Saturdays. I was one of those kids that as a librarian, you really don't want those children there all day because, I was there all day. And it was those librarians who I met when I was 8 or 9, Miss Long, and especially a woman named Frances Whitehead at the Detroit Public Library, who really saved me and really opened the world to me and gave me this great gift of loving to read and books to fulfill that love. So the library for me is just, it's just integral to a healthy, happy, good place to live. And that you're going to get a new library in Winthrop, I'm sure. It's just so exciting because a library is not just a repository for books. Right. It's a place that the community can come together and experience author readings or experience book discussions. It's all of those things, but it's a little worrisome to me that for many libraries, reading is no longer, instilling the love of reading and the joy of reading is no longer is no longer an obvious part of the mission. And that's, you know, that's the one thing that libraries do that nobody else does is and have the opportunity to do. So
Absolutely.
that's my little lecture about that.
Oh, well, wonderful. And we'll have to have you at the New Winthrop Library because we are, of the 30 different branches in the district, we have one of the highest circulations. So we are definitely a reading population, and,
Right. Yes.
and we're much loved as well. So a combination of both the books and the love of Nancy Pearl will be a wonderful thing to have you out here for.
I accept your invitation. So.
Wonderful. Excellent. Thank you. So one of the questions that that came to mind is we're in a very unusual time, really potentially a once in a century kind of event. It's something that we're experiencing globally and communally globally, although people are reacting in different ways. How have you seen other global events shape how we read and write as a society? And what might you guess might come of this in terms of how it is that we read and how it is that we write?
Well, you know, I've talked to a lot of people and I shared this. It's been very hard. This has been a very difficult time, I think, to sit down and concentrate on a book. Yeah. And I know from many of the people that I've talked to that it's the kind of thing where you pick up a book and you start reading it and you just say, no, you know, or I will hear from publicists wanting me to read a particular book and maybe talk about it. And it'll be, you know, a heart-wrenching memoir about, you know, and I just am trying, you know, I'm very honest and say, I'm just not reading those kinds of books now. I just can't. And I know after 9/11, which was probably the last big event that really had an effect on reading. What happened to me was that after 9/11 happened, I couldn't read fiction for a long time. And it wasn't, so I read a lot of nonfiction. It wasn't the kind of thing now where it's hard to concentrate. But the nonfiction that I read wasn't about terrorism. It wasn't about 9/11 at all. It was just fiction can be so emotionally hurly-burly.
Yes.
You know?
Yes.
And what I wanted was not that hurly-burliness. I just wanted a calm voice telling me something that I didn't know. So that was a big change. And now really, I think we're already in this time where a lot of people, even before, you know, the coronavirus, a lot of people were talking about how much trouble they had reading a book, you know, just sitting for that long and getting into a narrative, you know, that you have to follow through. And then thinking of a book like Oliver Twist or some, you know, Ulysses, I mean, some, you know, ginormous book, Duck's Newburyport, which is, you know, 1,000 pages. You know, they just felt they couldn't do it because we're so used to Twitter and Facebook. I mean, this fast click, read, click again, read. And I really think, and I feel like for me, that it's really affected my kind of brain chemistry. So I have to, you know, I have to say to myself, okay, you're going to sit down and this is a book that you're really enjoying and you're going to sit down and read it and you're not going to look at your phone and all of those things. So.
For sure. It's a bit of a shame, right? Because there is, actually, I would say for those of us with young children, there's not more time, but there is more time in that we're not commuting to work and we're not doing some of those things. It's a bit of a shame that we can't pick up War and Peace right now.
Right. Yes.
Really dive in, right?
Yeah. And I think that, you know, people say, in everything, like, I don't, like, all I do is read. And during this staying at home, I'm just doing a lot of jigsaw puzzles, but I don't, you know, I don't garden. And I have to say, I don't cook very much, although like everybody else, I'm baking a lot more, you know,
Yeah.
but you make those choices. So people who say, I don't have time to read, if I was gonna, you know, delve into that, I would say, well, what are you doing instead? And people are doing lots of other things, but nothing, I think nothing, you know, I'm a walker and I walk, you know, several hours a day and listen to books, um, but a book is like such a special, it's such a special thing in the way that you interact with it.
Yes, yes, for sure.
Yeah.
Well, a couple of questions around that, actually, a little bit on recommendations that you might have. And I think these speak a bit to the time and a bit to some of the more universal challenges. But one question that comes from Jill: what suggestions do you have to encourage reading in teens who have so many other bids for their free time?
Yeah, you know, teens, that's hard. And I have always found that the best way to encourage people of any age to read is to be enthusiastic about what you're giving them to read. And I think with teens, you can't, you as the parent or the adult in the household, it's not what you like, it's what they like. And, you know, I think it's important not to make reading a negative have to. Like, you know, you have to read for half an hour before you can go outside. I think that if there's teens who don't like to read, and I think part of the problem is if it's not a problem of reading itself, you know, if there's not like a neurological problem or whatever, the problem with anyone who doesn't like to read is that we as librarians haven't found the right book to start it all off on. And, you know, the other thing I think is that we tend only to, as a society, focus on what's new. And, you know, I think that there's lots of books that, I mean, remember that any book you haven't read is a new book to you. I mean, I think, you know, you always have to keep that in mind. But so with teens, I mean, I think it's important to find out what they're interested in, what they like to do, and then find the book that matches that. So for teens who are very into, you know, those role-playing games and computer games, oh my God, the book was in my head. Ready Player One, you know, yes. So you really want, or you want books to start with at least that are going to be very plot driven and page turners. And goodness knows there's a lot of those books out there.
Yes, and I love that you mentioned that it is something to remember that we have all that's been written as well, right? And I think your book list really explores some of those. Some of them may even be available in your library, and it is a good reminder that you don't just have to look at the new releases. You can look at
And one of the things that, you know, the internet has done is that the world of old books is readily available online, and you can usually find for not too expensive a cost almost any book that you're looking for, you know, whether it's a year old or, you know, 10 years old.
Oh, okay. Yeah, exactly. Yep. Now, a couple of questions from Paula, and I think this speaks to the fact that many people are looking for something lighter right now, something that might be a bit escapist. Do you have any recommendations on new great adult graphic novels, or graphic novels for adults, not to,
Wow.
or any great light, funny, but intelligently written novels, new or old is fine?
Yes. So one that I would absolutely recommend is a novel called The Diamond Lane by Karen Carbo. I'm looking over to the right because I have this book. Oh, here it is. So this is The Diamond Lane by Karen Carbo. And it's a wonderful story of two sisters who have been estranged for a while, living in Hollywood. And the one lives in Hollywood, one has turned out to be a documentary filmmaker. And she, because of an accident that has landed their mother in the hospital, she comes back home and with her fiance, and the two sisters have to figure out how to live together. It's funny. It's so well written. I love this book. And Karen Carbo is an Oregon writer, so we could consider her a neighbor.
Absolutely. Yes. Good Pacific Northwest. That's great.
Yeah, right. Another author, I just have to say, another author that I would recommend is Marian Keyes, Keyes.
Yeah.
Have you read any of her books, Shannon?
I think so. No.
So she's a novelist and has written many novels. The one that I would, she has a new one coming out. So people, coming out in the next couple of months, I think. So people should, I'm sure you'll get it in as an ebook as well. But this one happens to be my favorite, and it's called, her new book is called The Grown-Ups, which I believe, which I loved. But that sent me back to reread this one called The Other Side of the Story. And this is, this has a central event and then told from the three women who are involved in it. So it's really, we used to talk kind of disparagingly about chick lit, and I really think it's so important not to apologize for what you read. And so Marian Keyes is one of those. So another writer that I would really recommend, and most people were introduced to this writer by their grandmother or their mother, I was not, is a writer named Georgette Heyer, Heyer. And she is the woman who really invented the whole genre of the Regency romance. And she was a terrific historian. Her books are so funny. So the book that I would start with is called The Grand Sophy, S-O-P-H-Y. And I was teaching at the University of Washington Information School. I was teaching a reader's advisory course for many years. I taught there. And one semester when I had just discovered Georgette Heyer and fell in love with The Grand Sophy, for an end of the semester gift, my students photoshopped my picture on the cover of The Grand Sophy, which I just treasure that. So, but the Grand Sophy is wonderful. Frederica is wonderful. Sylvester, or The Wicked Uncle, starts out slowly, but then really picks up. And the nice thing is for all of those is that they're very good audio books. The readers are very, very good, and they are easily available, downloadable.
That's wonderful. And I am writing these down, and we will make sure that we share this on social media with anybody who wants to check out the social media page for Winthrop Library Friends. Those are fantastic recommendations. That's going to keep us going for a while. Not quite till the vaccine's released.
Well, then we'll do this again, and I'll give some more suggestions.
That's excellent. Well, I was going to ask actually one of my questions that worked well with Paula's actually, but was what you would recommend for people who wanted something that was more of an avoidance or an escape, which you've just done. What about people that might be, and I don't know if there are these people, but I'm guessing there are, that might want to get themselves immersed in some of the questions of the time?
Oh, and the questions of the time.
Yeah. And that could go in lots of directions, obviously.
Yeah, right. So there's a wonderful there's a wonderful work of nonfiction by a writer named David Treuer, Treuer. And the title is, David Treuer grew up in a very interesting family. His father was a survivor of the Holocaust, and his mother was a Native American. And he grew up on maybe the Standing Rock Reservation. And what he, the usual narrative is that Indian history stopped with, bury my heart at Wounded Knee. broken knee. But what he's done in this book is not argue with the author of that book, but instead sort of have a dialogue with him about that was the beginning of history. And so for people who are interested in Native American history, that's a really, really excellent, needed book today. And you could read it in conjunction with Tommy Orange's novel, There. You know, neither one is going to be a hoot and a holler to read. They're both heavy,
Sure.
but they're both really, really good. A wonderful biography is called Our Man, and it's by George Packer.
Okay.
There was an excerpt. Writes for the New Yorker frequently, and there was an excerpt in this book. But this is a biography of a man named Richard Holbrooke, and we know Richard Holbrooke because Richard Holbrooke is the man who negotiated the Dayton Accords that brought the Balkan War to an end. And it's not you know, so many biographies of famous people are like hagiographies. You know, they're you know, they're saying this person is a saint. What George Packer does in this book is really look at Richard Holbrooke and talk about him in all of his three-dimensionality. And really, Richard Holbrooke, all Richard Holbrooke ever wanted to be in his life was Secretary of State, and he never achieved that. He was an assistant Secretary of State under Hillary Clinton. He was sent to Afghanistan to try to sort all that out because he had done that with the Balkans. He died. He didn't succeed and died shortly after. It's won awards. I knew as soon as I read it that if it didn't win some major biography award, that was not right with the world. But that's a very, very good biography. And so anyone who's interested in the late 20th century history from Vietnam on, that's a really, really good book to read.
Fantastic. Well, I was in the Balkans in the military actually in 1997, so I will absolutely put that on the short list. So thank you.
And I was in Sarajevo about 6 years ago doing some work for the U.S. Embassy there with kids reading. We did a program called If All Bosnia Read the Same Book.
And what did you have them read?
We had them read. I mean, your jaw's gonna drop open because you're gonna think, how could that work? A Diary of a Part-Time Indian, the German Alexei novel. And by the time I got involved in that, and I could just talk about Bosnia forever because I just fell in love with the country. By the time I got involved with the program, they had already chosen that book, The Absolutely True Diary of a Part-Time Indian. And my first thought was, how are these Bosnian teens, you know, why are you doing this? Which I didn't say. And I was totally wrong. It was a book that you can really, really identify, you know, teenagers can really identify with Arnold, the main character. And you know, my job going there was to work with the adults who were going to be leading book discussions about this book. And so I would speak to teachers and I would speak to librarians and parents. And, you know, I've always believed book groups can save the world, you know, that book groups can make the world a better place. And I remember the first time that I was there to talk about how to lead a book group. For those of you who have read or have not read Absolutely True Diary, at the end of the book, there's a list of all the tribes that the main character belongs to. So he belongs to the tribe of cartoonists, of Spokane Indians, you know, juniors in high school, whatever. And so I said to the group, well, let's go around and each one of us say a tribe that we belong to. And the first person said, and you'll appreciate this because you were there, Shannon. The first person said, I belong to the tribe of people who have Serbian mothers and Muslim fathers. And somebody from the back of the room said, I'm in that tribe too. And that just was, there it is. I know, it makes me cry even to think about it. So that was a really meaningful, but there's a wonderful book about the war, about the Bosnian War, called Love Thy Neighbor, a story of war. And it's old, it's older. I mean, it came out much closer, maybe in early in 2000. And it's by Peter Maass, Maass. And it's one of the best books about the Bosnian War and what it was like to be there. So you must read that.
I will absolutely read it. You know, I will say one of the books on my shelf that I have never gotten through, to your rule on
right.
finding the right time, is, and I think it's outstanding, but it's Black Lamb, Grey Falcon. But it's about this big, and you have to have some staying power to.
You do. And, you know, that might be the kind of book that would be better to read electronically, just so you don't know quite how long. But Rebecca West's a wonderful writer, and that really about Yugoslavia was her magnum opus, I guess.
Well, it's such important information, right? I've just read parts of it, but I aspire. It's sort of like the Bible, you know, reading it straight through. We should all do it once. So you made the point of the book clubs can save the world. And actually, I was just thinking about this because as we have been working towards this new library, and there's so many needs, right? There's so many really acute needs. And yet thinking about how it is that we come back together in a time where we have gone through several, years now of increasing polarization.
Right.
How can libraries save the world? How can books save the world? How can we actively use those as tools to bring our communities and our cultures back together?
You know, when we started the If All Seattle Read the Same Book way back in 1993, my desire was to pick books that really, if you read them, you couldn't stop talking about them or thinking about them. You know, so I wasn't interested in people reading bestsellers altogether. I wanted books that really dealt with the human experience in various ways. And I think that I think that what books can do and what libraries can do, because we want the book groups to meet in the library. I think what a book can do is provide the table that will allow you to talk about important things in terms of the book. It's much easier to say, you know, how would you have behaved? You know, what would you have done in Scout Finch's situation? Or rather than saying, rather than doing it in some Never Land, you know, to sort of ground it in the book. And the books are there to talk about. I mean, there's a wonderful, wonderful older title. The first book that we did for If All Seattle Read the Same Book was what is it called? Russell Banks, The Sweet Hereafter. And it's a movie, so that was nice too when it came out. But what the book talks about is how a community comes together after a terrible accident. And interestingly, I think just describing it that way makes me think it would be, you know, how does the community deal with grief? Yes. You know, with a collective grief. And how do we each deal with grief individually, whether it touches us directly or not? You know, how do we deal with other people's grief? So it's books like that I think are so important to read. And I think that it's, in a book group, you're always going to get personal stories, you know, but you don't want to, but with a book that you're talking about, that's setting the agenda, if you will, you can you can bring it back to that. And I think it's, I don't think we talk about important things enough. And I think there are plenty, because it's not safe, because it's dangerous. But with,
Sure.
I think with a book and responding to what the characters did or didn't do, that makes it easier. And with a good leader, a good book group leader, that
Yes.
makes it easier.
Sometimes it's easier to tell it slant, right?
Yes, right, exactly. Right.
And then how it all applies. No, that's wonderful. And then I was going to ask selfishly, since I have 2 young children, but I think probably lots of parents would love to know this. I'd love to know what you had your daughters read when they were young. And maybe because this is part of the research that you've done on this next book that you have coming out, what are the books that, and I'm sure there's many, but that maybe a handful that children just should not miss?
Well, you know, my children, I had my children read all the books that I loved when I was a child. Many of those books now deal with situations that, you know, it was a less enlightened time. So one of the people we interviewed in the Writers' Library is Louise Erdrich. And one of the things that she talked about was how offensive Little House in the Prairie, those books were to her, because the mother, Ma Ingalls, hated Native Americans. And so, you know, Louise Erdrich said that's why she started writing children's books about, you know, with Native American characters to balance that, and wouldn't let her children read those Laura Ingalls Wilder books, which were staples of my childhood and many childhoods, many people's childhoods. So, you know, so everything that I'm going to say is, you know, you have to think about. A book I don't think anybody should miss as a child is My Father's Dragon.
Oh, yes.
By Ruth Sanders. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. Another book that another picture book is called The Christmas Crocodile.
Aha. Okay.
And it is illustrated by David Small, who is a wonderful illustrator. And going back to your first question, Shannon, that one of the audience members had about graphic novels. David Small's first graphic novel is an adult graphic novel, about 5 years old now, that's absolutely wonderful and a bit heartbreaking. So I will say that. But The Christmas Crocodile, I don't think anyone should miss that. There's another wonderful, you know, my librarians that I grew up with were Canadian. One was Canadian, and so I read all the British children's books. And when many people read Mary Poppins, and of course there's the movie, which has really overshadowed the book. But Mary Poppins in the books is not a nice person. She is, you know, if you read those books, she is not nice to Michael and Jane. And yeah, and she's scary. But there's a children's book called Mr. Pudgeons, Pudgins, which is about a wonderful babysitter. I would think of it as the antidote to Mary Poppins. Mr. Pudgeons is a babysitter who, when he's there babysitting, wonderful things happen. Like the bathtub flies, you know, you turn on the water and out of the hot water faucet comes root beer, and out of the cold water faucet comes orange soda. I mean, just wonderful, wonderful things. So those are really, those are some books. And, you know, the third Book Lust book is called Book Crush, and it's all children's, it's books for kids and teens, beginning with the very youngest through teenagehood.
Perfect. So Book Crush for all of you that have children and teenagers. Pick up Book Crush for Nancy's recommendations. Excellent. Yes, that's wonderful. Well, Nancy,
wait. I have some more people shouldn't miss. Make Way for Ducklings.
Oh, yes. That's
Robert McCluskey. There's another absolutely wonderful picture book called Bubble Trouble.
Ooh.
by a woman named Margaret Mayhew, who's a very well-known New Zealand, very lauded New Zealand writer. She wrote this as a poem, and then it was turned into a picture book with some fabulous, fabulous illustrations. And it's all in rhyme, and it's just rollicking. So that's one of my very, very, very favorite books.
That's, you know, actually we have a Kiwi friend who gave us 2 children's books, and both of them are the Gruffalo, of course, and the A Summer Day, I think. And they're both poems, and they both have that kind of momentum that comes from that rhythm. Yeah, it's wonderful.
Yeah.
New Zealand's got it figured out. That's right. In more than ways than one, actually.
Yeah, right, totally.
Right.
Yeah.
That's great.
Elect a woman.
Yeah. Oh, well, she's fabulous. Yeah, there she is. There's several comments that people are loving your recommendations, and also love that you're laughing about them, so that you clearly enjoy them, and they're part of your heart, which is just fantastic. So
totally.
Well, thank you for your time tonight. It's just amazing to have you on here, and really a true honor to have a chance to talk with you and hear your thoughts about reading and libraries and books. We're actually in our last phase. Despite all of this that's happening, we're actually a little overwhelmed, to be honest, because we sort of figured when this started to happen, gosh, you know, we're towards the end of this capital campaign, it might not happen. But the donors and the community have come in so strong, and we're down to the last 400,000. Sounds like a lot, but in a $5 million project, it's actually pretty amazing. Yes. And so we're really close to the finish line. And
good.
It's we will very much look forward to having you at the library. But before then, I hope we can do this again, maybe when your book comes out in September.
Oh, I'd love it. Let's count on it. Definitely.
Wonderful. If anyone wants any more information on Nancy, she's at nancypearl.com, I believe. And at the library, we're at winthroplibraryfriends.org. And thank you so much, Nancy. Stay healthy, stay safe, and enjoy the jigsaw puzzles.
Thank you, Shannon. It's been a real pleasure.
Wonderful. All right. Take care.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.